If you showed a photo of this plane to any physicist from the last century, he'd definitely tell you, laughter, that this pot-bellied thing would never, ever get off the ground. It has the aerodynamics of a flying brick and a nose the size of a 5-story building. And he'd be completely wrong. But the craziest part is hidden inside. If you open, its mouth, you could fit the entire fuselage of a standard passenger jet inside, just like a nesting doll. Well, for example, an Airbus A320, the kind you flew on for vacation, and there would even be a little room left over. Forget everything you knew about aviation. Before you is the world's only real flying matryoshka, the kit aircraft created solely to swallow other airliners whole. But appearances can sometimes be deceiving. Behind this funny, comical face lies one of the most complex, expensive, and crucial engineering projects in modern Europe. An aircraft without which the production of brand new passenger jets would grind to a halt in a matter of days. Today on the Wings and Turbines channel, we'll dissect the anatomy of the strangest transport aircraft, music, on the planet, the Airbus Beluga. And although this aircraft was created exclusively for transporting music aircraft parts, one day it swallowed something completely different. Something incredibly rare and insanely expensive. A cargo that physically wouldn't fit into any other airliner on the planet. But let's talk about that mission a little later, because the Beluga wasn't originally created for dramatic rescue operations, but for the company's sheer survival. To understand how this flying monster came to be, we need to delve into history and learn about what is perhaps the greatest humiliation in European aviation. The fact is, Airbus isn't just one factory. It's like a giant puzzle scattered across Europe. The wings for the planes are made in the UK, the tails are assembled in Spain, the fuselages in Germany, and only the final assembly takes place in France. And so, at some point, they had to transport these huge, indivisible chunks of metal across half the continent. Trains and barges were too slow. An entire wing simply wouldn't fit into a standard cargo plane. And in the 1970s, out of desperation, Airbus began using American Super Gay aircraft. But the moral dilemma was that these old, pot-bellied planes were based on the Boeing 377. And that, no matter how you look at it, is the Europeans' main and sworn rival. There was even a bitter joke circulating in aviation circles back then. Every brand new Airbus is delivered to the customer on the wings of a Boeing. Can you imagine how infuriating that was for the Europeans? To wash away this stain on their reputation and speed up production, in the early 90s, the Europeans decided, we need our own flying hangar, period. But how could they build an aircraft of such incredible size without going bankrupt in the process? The engineers took a clever approach. They didn't start the Beluga from scratch. They used the familiar twin-engine Airbus A300 passenger jet as a base. At the factory, they literally cut off the entire upper half of the fuselage. They simply sliced it off like the lid of a can, leaving only the floor and the cockpit. And on top of this base, they built a giant lightweight dome shaped like a whale. That's exactly why the lower part of the plane looks completely standard, while the upper part looks like a set from a sci-fi movie. It's a classic Frankenstein's monster in the world of commercial aviation. There's no other way to put it. In conventional aircraft, the nose has a smooth, streamlined shape, and the cockpit is located almost in the middle. In the Beluga, however, the cockpit has been artificially lowered as far down as possible. It has literally been pressed against the front landing gear. Why make the plane look even more monstrous? The answer is brilliant in its engineering simplicity, so the pilots don't get in the way of loading. Thanks to this lowered cockpit, the entire massive nose above their heads can swing up completely. This allows for the loading of massive fuselage sections from other aircraft directly from the front, without disconnecting the highly complex wiring from the control systems in the cockpit. The pilots can sit comfortably in their seats, sipping coffee, and watch as a massive wing slides into the plane right over their heads. Well, that's the job. But there's a catch. Because of the extreme aerodynamic drag of this dome, you can't just pull a truck up alongside the Beluga on the tarmac and toss a package inside. The loading process is a distinct form of high-tech art. The aircraft slowly taxis up to a special terminal building, whose gates perfectly match the shape of its nose. The docking occurs with millimeter precision, forming a completely sealed airlock, so that not a single gust of wind can get inside the huge, empty fuselage. A strong gust could tip this thing over right on the ground. And only after that does the giant nose open and automatic rail platforms smoothly roll a section of the new airliner inside. I can already anticipate your logical question. What do they do at other airports around the world where there are no such buildings? My answer is that if there aren't any, they bring giant mobile scaffolding up to the Beluga's nose. There's nothing to be done. And in this case, the aviators become hostages to the weather. If there are strong gusts of wind outside, opening the giant nose is strictly prohibited. Otherwise, it will simply be torn off at the hinges. The aircraft will stand obediently on the concrete and wait for calm. Looking at these colossal dimensions, it seems that the Beluga is capable of transporting an entire army. But here lies the main paradox of this machine. We are used to judging trucks by the weight they can lift. But the Beluga's superpower lies not in weight at all, but in sheer volume. Hidden inside that hump is nearly 1,000 cubic meters of empty space. That's more than the cargo compartment of the legendary six-engine Maria. The cargo compartment is so enormous that the Beluga can swallow a giant, heavy CH-47 shock military helicopter, whole or roll in two heavy multi-purpose helicopters at once, such as the massive H-175s. True, the rotors would still have to be removed, and they would only fit one behind the other, like in a giant garage. However, despite having the largest fuselage volume in the world, the Beluga is surprisingly weak. Its maximum payload is only about 47 tons. By comparison, a standard cargo Boeing 747 can lift over 100 tons, and the payload of the newest 747-8F is already over 140 tons. That's almost 3 times more than the Beluga's. Why is that? Because what the Beluga carries in its fuselage sections is ultra-thin aluminum and composites. Essentially, it's just a huge hollow tube, gigantic in size, but weighing almost nothing. The Beluga doesn't carry heavy metal, it carries air. Air. You might think that since the cargo weighs almost nothing, flying this whale is easy. Quite the opposite. Carrying such massive volumes of air comes at a terrible cost. Flying this aircraft turns into a real thriller as soon as the weather turns bad. In strong crosswinds during takeoff or landing, the Beluga is literally blown off the runway. The aircraft begins to act like a weather vane, trying to turn its nose into the wind. The huge bulging hump blocks the airflow, heading toward the tail. Chaotic, ragged vortices form behind the dome, and the central keel simply stops working, finding itself in a dead aerodynamic shadow. And this is where regular viewers of the Echelon channel should get a sense of déjà vu. If you watched our first episode, you'll recall that Soviet engineers faced exactly the same problem when designing the giant An-Tu-25M. The massive space shuttle on its roof blocked airflow to the tail in exactly the same way, which is why they had to split it in two. The Beluga's engineers took a similar approach. Instead of a single large fin that was choked in the shadow of the hump, they attached two additional vertical stabilizers to the edges of the tail, but even those don't fully solve the problem. Beluga pilots often have to perform a so-called crab landing, where the aircraft flies sideways at an angle to the runway and levels off literally at the last second before touching down on the concrete. One wrong move and the control yoke goes haywire. Just one, and this giant sail will collapse onto the wing. That is precisely why only the company's most elite and experienced test pilots are allowed at the Beluga's controls. It would seem that this highly specialized aircraft is doomed to spend its entire life shuttling between 4 factories on a boring corporate schedule. But sometimes the Beluga receives missions that no other aircraft on the planet can handle. Remember, at the beginning I promised to tell you what else this whale swallowed. Here it is, 1999. The French government faced an unsolvable problem. They needed to send a historical treasure to an exhibition in Tokyo, a giant canvas by Eugène Delacroix, Liberty Leading the People. The painting, along with its protective sarcophagus, was so large that it physically wouldn't fit through the doors of any existing Boeing or military transport aircraft. The painting could not be folded, disassembled, or cut into pieces. What to do? A total dead end, and then a smiling whale came to the rescue. Only the Beluga, with its hinged forehead, was able to gently swallow the masterpiece and safely deliver it to Japan. The Japanese are delighted. The French take pride in it. Only 5 original Belugas were built.
And over time, they met the fate of many outdated technologies. They became too small. In the 2010s, Airbus began production of the latest A350 airliners. Their composite wings turned out to be so long that the old Beluga could only fit 1 wing per flight. Factories sat idle waiting for parts, so the Europeans created an even larger monster, the Beluga XL. It was based on the more modern and larger Airbus A330. The new version is 6 meters longer, 1 meter wider, and can now transport 2 massive wings at once, doubling logistics efficiency. And to emphasize the amusing appearance of this giant, the engineers decided, well, since it already looks like a whale, let's not take it too seriously. Right at the factory, they officially painted sly blue eyes and a wide smile onto the new aircraft. Now this cheerful giant scares birds and delights photographers across Europe every day. But what happens to old planes when new ones arrive? In aviation, the answer is usually harsh. They're sent to the desert and cut up for scrap metal. But not the Beluga. With the introduction of the fleet of smiling XLs, the company decided that destroying the legendary first 5 Belugas would be a crime. They were removed from the internal factory schedule, and a separate, unique airline, Airbus Beluga Transport, was founded. Now these planes have become mercenaries. They offer services for transporting fantastically oversized cargo around the world for any client. So, friends, if you ever need to transport a ready-made space station, a luxury yacht, or a couple of military satellites to another country, you know who to call. This pot-bellied, absurd, yet incredibly well-designed machine proved one simple thing to the whole world. In real aviation, form always follows function. And sometimes, to build the perfect, elegant passenger liner, you first need to create a smiling whale. Friends, I carefully read your comments under the last video about the giant Maria. You asked me to explore the story of yet another absolute aviation legend, a machine that flew at the edge of space at bullet speed, outpaced the Earth's rotation, and physically elongated by 25 centimeters right in mid-flight. Yes, I think you've already guessed, Concorde. Work on this massive and very interesting investigation has already begun. Be sure to subscribe to the Wings and Turbines channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss the premiere. In the meantime, write in the comments which engineering approach impresses you more, the smiling pot-bellied whale that carries air or the arrow-shaped needle piercing the sky at bullet speed and burning tons of fuel just while taxiing. Let's see which of us there are more of, romantics or pragmatists. Fly safely and see you soon on Supersonic.